You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Bringing you news from the local area and around the world. The aim is to increase participation of sport and awareness. We've been very fortunate in this show to have been joined by some of the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, trainers. We've spoken to people across a broad range of sports who've given us a really good insight into what they do. We also have a segment on the show where we speak to psychologists, people who work in psychology and related fields, who give us insight into their take on things, mental health psychology. They've got a really interesting guest who's going to sort of give us more of an insight into canoeing. It's certainly no doubt a very challenging sport, that's for sure, which requires a lot of strength physically and mentally, but I'm sure we'll get to know a little bit more about what it entails, and hopefully for anyone listening, it might encourage you to take part or in canoeing. So Craig Morris is the Olympic Canoe Slalom Coach at British Canoeing, and he joins us on Salford City Radio 94.5 FM. Welcome to the show, Craig. Great to have you on board.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on.
Craig, so you said Olympic Canoe Slalom Coach. Can you give us a bit of an idea of what does that involve? What do you do for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I've been involved in canoe slalom for about 33 years now. So most of my life, from being dragged kicking and screaming by my dad, following my elder brother around when I wanted to be kicking a football instead. So he is still alive, but I'm sure he laughs at the fact that I'm now, making a career in coaching the sport that I used to literally, reach my feet across the car door to not be taken on a trip. So our sport is, for the listeners who maybe aren't that familiar with our sport, it's effectively ski slalom downhill but on a river. So very changeable rivers, changeable courses, there's no set course, and we have to navigate a design of course of gates for downstream and upstreams on pretty feisty white water. So it's a huge amount, as you said, about upper body strength, about decision making, about adaptability, about your skills of perception in the moment, and obviously all the psychological and embodied components of everything else that marry in that mission to be the best you can be in those moments.
Absolutely, and for yourself, Craig. I mean, you sort of mentioned, give us a bit of insight into your own sort of the way you got into it. But what sort of inspired you to sort of take up coaching as a career? What was sort of your inspiration to sort of to get involved and obviously to have been involved in the sport for as long as you are now?
Well, I've always been really curious and passionate about learning. Always been quite fascinated with people. I used to paddle myself. I call myself an enthusiastic paddler rather than an athlete. I was kind of national level. Went to a junior worlds, but never really pushed on from there. And it's only the why behind that and understanding why my journey had limits on it only became clear once I'd started coaching. So the coaching journey was one of fortune, really. I was travelling around Europe a bit lost after doing a degree, and the coach developer sort of, I think, sensed quite perceptively, that I was a bit lost, and kind of walked me through some options really in coaching. And I've been fortunate enough to be right place, right time in my career in terms of the opportunities available, and so I've worked right through from, which I'm really, really grateful for, because it's very difficult to do now in modern sporting organisations, is to work right from beginner level right through to the, I guess, Olympic level throughout the whole pathway.
Absolutely.
So coaching was definitely something I fell into. I didn't choose it. I would say over time I've become really clear on my why, and as with many things in life, it's evolved. But the understanding of the why and what it gives me and what I hope it gives others is kind of been born through experience over time.
It's quite interesting, Craig, how you kind of you sort of you participated yourself, and then you sort of went into coaching. What was that like for you to make that transition? What were your sort of thoughts at the time when you sort of became a coach instead of possibly participating yourself? What was it like for you to do that?
I think it was a balance of opportunities and barriers, Jimmy, to be honest. So I guess the opportunities were that I was rarely, if at all, coached as a paddler myself, partly due to the level I was operating at, partly due to where we lived and a few other factors. But essentially, I never really had a framework or philosophy as a paddler that was influenced by a coach. My influences were predominantly from my elder brother, who was 5 years 5 years older than myself. So I think in that way I'm really, and I've written about this a few times, I came into coaching with a blank canvas. There was no, didn't have a clear sort of philosophy of organization, of physiology, of skill development. I couldn't have even told you skill acquisition was a thing at the time. So, but I was confident that I was adaptable to people, and I thought I could get on with a breadth of different people, whether that be in an organisational hierarchy, a performance director, or whether that be, young Elaine who's 14 getting in a boat for the first time and managing relationships and functioning around with parents and schools. So they were the opportunities. I was, I guess, a blank canvas for learning. The barriers perhaps were ones of feeling perhaps that I needed to earn respect. I remember a little story very early on that so my first formal coaching role was for a talented athlete scholarship scheme, which is kind of a government supported funding program in England primarily. And one of the athletes I was lucky enough to support in that first week had an inkling that a former Olympic medalist who just retired was going to be the coach for that program. And was severely disappointed when I got announced. So I guess some of the barriers were that of trying to build respect, having not had a reputation in paddling or playing or performing, and I know that's a hot debate in the world of coaching.
Absolutely, yeah.
You need to have played to a level to coach. I would have opinions on that. So yeah, but very much a journey of becoming, of kind of knowing as I go and immersing myself around as many people as possible to try and, I'm just definitely a sponge.
It's really, you have a really great point. That's sort of a show on its own, really, about the debate around, whether one should have been at a certain level. I think that can be sometimes, it can be a hindrance too, I think, Craig, if someone sort of does reach a level. I think coaching has obviously got a lot of experience. It requires a lot of things, communicating information, and there's so many things involved in being a coach. But certainly in my experience, I have to say that at times I think that it can be a barrier in itself, being a top performer in that field, because maybe you see things too subjectively. I know it's difficult for you to comment on that, but do you sort of see what I mean? There maybe if you sort of, you're this sort of top footballer, and then you get a job working for a team, maybe it might be that you sort of see the game a certain way and are not as open as, seeing things a little bit different.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel very fortunate to have not been very good at what I did and to not be very well supported. I certainly wasn't very grateful of that at the time. I was someone who was probably having critical conversations with people about missing out on things, but actually when I reflect back and look now, I think it was the making of where I currently sit. I can't know that it wouldn't be better for me to have been good and had good coaching and strong values and philosophies instilled or shared with me, but I think because I didn't have them, but I think I wouldn't replace the journey I've had in that I was, I'm never someone who's sure. I don't think there is a final concrete answer.
Absolutely.
So, and I'm very individual in my approach. So one thing that worked maybe for me as a paddler, I've come to learn that this should not be imposed on anyone else, because everyone's journey is completely individual, right from the socio-cultural factors, the historical ones, the physiological and everything in between. So, where I stand on the debate is I'm just really content and grateful for having to discover myself and not feeling that I knew answers, feeling like I wanted to go on a journey with others to discover things.
Absolutely. No, that's really interesting insight. I'm sure the listeners are sort of, sort of listening, and I'm sure we have listeners that are familiar with, canoeing, and certainly many of our listeners are familiar with many other sports, and certainly see some of the greatest coaches across a wide range of sports may not have reached the top. Some nowhere near the top in that profession as a performer, but certainly as a coach. It was really interesting once. I heard an interview. I'm sure it was an interview I heard on TV. I think it was Jose Mourinho, when that sort of, he'd mentioned about him in his playing career didn't compare to someone. I can't remember who it was, but he talked about his coaching career is a different ball game. But I suppose there's some really interesting things you say there. Craig, I find that really interesting, your take on that. And in terms of your own sort of highlights, I know that over the years there's been many, but what are some of the things that if you look back on now, you kind of think, these were sort of highlights that come to mind?
Oh, yeah, kind of a wealth of different things, really. And I guess a lot of the memories and highlights epitomise why I'm in the job. So some of the richest memories and highlights, I think, and I won't name names here, obviously they're not celebrities because they're canoe athletes, but I really remember a distinct conversation with an athlete who had decided to retire. Had been sort of outside of my coaching group for 2 or 3 years, and was in my coaching group through their adolescent years. And one of the first things they said to me is that I didn't realise it at the time, but when I look back on our time together as a group, I should have given myself the permission to be enjoying it more than I did, because I reflect now, and there was some of the most memorable times for enjoyment, for growth, for relationships. So I guess that was a real kind of confidence boost for me as a coach, because particularly I think when you're dealing with or working, sporting with athletes or just people through adolescent years, there's a huge amount of change goes on, and it's difficult for them to attune to the journey and really be present within it, because there's so much going on, both biologically and socially.
Absolutely.
So to hear it very soon after the journey was really nice, and I think there's great power in that. So that's more of the process and the kind of why of mutual growth that I'm in the job for. On the performance side, obviously seeing people push their boundaries and go on to do things they didn't think possible. Probably in 2019 we had the culmination of our Olympic selection for Tokyo, and really in the fortunate position to support a full training group that managed to qualify places for that games, and it was a very emotional, very intense, very special weekend. And I've been having memories of that because we went back to that venue last weekend for a World Cup. So I think that was a really special time, a sense of people achieving what they want and coming together. But outside of that, a lot of the highlights, Jimmy, to be honest, are often when we try and push really hard to do quite social, cultural things while we're away, so it'll be a trip in the mountains or going out to do something a little different, some different activities together as a team or as a group, and just seeing people being able to transcend the boundaries of competitiveness. Because although we're a small team and individual sport, so whilst we try to operate as a team, there's obviously always different dynamics at play. So seeing people relax in different settings and being able to kind of create those with them, really special.
That's interesting. And where the sort of Britain stand in the sort of I'm not sure if this is within your sort of remit. Maybe you can give us a bit of an insight. But where would you say Britain stands in terms of on a world stage in canoeing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've got a very rich history in canoeing. I would say we're in Canoe Slalom. We're a top 6 nation. I think if we're a top 4 nation at a major championships, then we're having a strong event. What we do have is really good strength and depth, but probably a thin pool as well. I don't like using the word talent, so I'll try and avoid it here. But a thin sort of depth we have globally in terms of participants within the country. but at the elite level, we have quite strong competition for places. So if you make the British team or British number one for an Olympic boat, you have the capability to go on to be successful at elite level, at world level.
Mm.
So yeah, we kind of won medals at consecutive Olympics for some time now, and we're really pleased to be able to do that. And we're extremely well supported. I think I would say we're known for having a strong system in the most positive view of that word, in terms of we're organised, we're a very supportive coaching team, and we're able to provide a good environment for athletes to thrive, and that gives them a platform to, I guess, do what they do and express themselves in high performance competitions. So yeah, we're battling out that it's a bit of an Eastern European stronghold, our sport in the professional era, with the exception of one extremely high-performing female in Australia, who I'm sure you well know, Jessica Fox.
That's right, that's correct, yeah.
She props up medal tables on her own, but
yes, absolutely.
We have a good go competing with her.
Yeah, no, interesting you say, and I mean, so outside, say, the sort of major of the Olympics and sort of major tournaments, what's the competition like all year round, Craig? I'm sort of listeners will be interested to sort of, I mean, some of these sort of sports we see at the Olympics, for example. I suppose it's easy to take for granted that throughout the year that they'll be competing and so on and so forth. But what generally happens outside a major event with the canoeing slalom?
Sure. So we're fortunate enough to be based at the home of the 2012 Olympics. It's where I'm speaking to you from now. So we have a high performance centre down in Lee Valley, just north of London. So we're based here all year round. We train all year round, primarily on this venue, even in the snow. Those who are fortunate enough to see the Rob and Ramesh series will have seen them visit us in very cold conditions last year. So we train all year round. We have a selection series for the British team in April, traditionally, and then we're into the international season. So we'll do 2 championships in a normal year, European and Worlds, and then we'll have 5 World Cup events. That's what we call the A-Class International, so that's the highest level. And then obviously the Olympic Games every 3 or 4 years, as it may be in COVID time.
Yeah.
Outside of that, there is a domestic competition. It's interesting for someone who's navigated a whole pathway in coaching. I guess there's a certain point where the domestic calendar is your bread and butter. It's your growth stage. It's your workshop to craft things. Yes, when you get to the level that I currently support, it does get hard to fit those into your calendar. So yeah, it's kind of a balance really. But yeah, it's starting to thrive again, canoe slalom in the UK, but it does go through fluctuations of volume of participants. It's something we're looking to address.
I mean, one of the things that sort of strikes me when I watch like canoeing slalom on sort of TV and is a sort of, it seems to me there's so many variables that can affect the performance. I mean, it's the same in a lot of sports, but just it seems to me you've really got to be on it mentally and physically. And what sort of training do you guys do? I mean, it's like I watch sometimes and think, wow, the decisions they've got to make is like, you're talking like split-second decisions and the speed. And what's the training like, Craig? Just for our listeners and for myself, really, I'm just curious to know what you guys do.
Well, the way you describe the sport is why we're in it. I mean, we love it. I don't think these guys could take on a sport that was a straight line in more controllable conditions. I just don't think it'd have enough variability. I always think we're on the edge of an extreme sport. I mean, many people would view our sport as extreme. We probably don't put ourselves in that bracket, but maybe we're too close to it. But you can certainly get hurt. It's a defining factor. So it depends, really, I guess, Jimmy, on like people's philosophies, the athlete's philosophy, how they see the sport itself and learn. But I guess I can only speak for our environment here within the group that we work in. And it's evolved over time collaboratively, I think. So we see it from a pretty ecological viewpoint. So I think in terms of skill development, I guess the first thing is exactly like you say, is actually taking stock of what are the demands of your event, and decision making is a huge piece to that. There's definitely not a railway track down this course that if we plan it we can lock in and the job's a good one. If we've done the physical work, we'll be quick enough. very much about picking up on the key information sources in the moment. So yeah, we do a huge amount of, I guess, acknowledgement or representative training to kind of immerse ourselves in those environments, become comfortable with it, to pick up on the key information for each individual. And we stress test it, I guess. We play with it, we have fun with it, we create different ways of training with it. This morning, for example, we're doing some team run training, which has a lot of crossover for individual, because you can't control your line down the river, which you can't always take hold of anyway with the water. So putting in an extra boat to move around is you know, and positively acting on that, on the invitations around that, is part of some of the like more creative work we might do.
And so, I mean, obviously, you know, the training, and there'll be things you sort of keep in confidence and confidential. But do I mean, it's an individual thing, but do the athletes sort of do things like weight training or as well, or mental skills training too, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, people often describe our athletes as Y-shaped. So yeah, very lean on the bottom half, and then kind of Y-shaped from there with broad shoulders. So yeah, they do a huge amount of weight training, and we play with that a little bit. So we try to bring the river into the weight stream and vice versa. Okay. So we try to make it about movement and coordination, as well as getting a good stable base. I guess it's extremely individual. Like the guys I work with now have been training for many years, so the weights they do now or need to do now maybe is a very different picture from when they was 15, 16. But yeah, predominantly the main training sources are some element of speed endurance, whether that be flat water or taking place on the white water. Weights-based work, and then a high volume of exposure to white water, and different themes of white water. So we're fortunate, effectively, if you imagine, we train predominantly on artificial rivers now, where we can press stop and go. And drain the channel, and the bottom of the channel is effectively like a big Meccano set. We can move it around and change where the river flows and how it flows. So not only do we need to travel sometimes to get different exposure and transfer of skills, but we can also create that environment at home.
Well, that's incredible. That's amazing. That's great. Was that available when you sort of first got involved in coaching, or is that something that sort of progressed?
Yeah, I'm not that old, Jimmy. I'm getting...
No. It's like, I mean, it's
no, you're quite right. When I grew up as a paddler, I guess there was predominantly 1 to 2 artificial venues in the UK, and they would be deemed to be quite dated now, but they were built on a similar setup. But predominantly, we used to train on natural rivers.
Yes.
So it was the precipitation or the rock formations that dictated the flow of the river. I guess as we've become more of an elite sport, or more sort of solid in the Olympic program, then people want a stable environment for people to perform in.
Absolutely.
So what you wouldn't be able to control in a natural river was if your race was in the morning and your competitors' race was in the afternoon, the river could be 4 foot higher and moving at a higher speed, and therefore it wasn't deemed to be a level playing field. So courses have moved to a more controllable artificial nature.
Absolutely, it's really interesting.
Play with it like a skate park, really, but on water.
No, it's interesting. What sort of goes into training and sort of. I find that sort of really fascinating. How many sports sort of are using more and more technology, I guess, and different ways to just get that extra fraction of a second. And are the athletes full time, or some full time and part time? Craig, generally at the level that you're the level that you're at.
Yeah, sure. The athletes are full time. Some of them will be doing some education on the side, or have done, depending on the age groups or just the opportunities that present. But yeah, they're full time, so funded through the National Lottery and the government initiatives around UK sport. So yeah, we're fortunate enough to be able to facilitate them. I think to keep pace with the evolution of the Olympic sports. It's almost a must. I wouldn't rule it out not being, but even just the travel schedule deems it pretty hard to hold any other employment these days.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really. I think one of the things that I think is really obviously the British public love their sport and love the Olympic team to do really well, and we've seen what a big difference funding has made over the years.
Absolutely. I think it's important to say, though, Jimmy, that we do, and the more experienced I become, the more clear it is that, having an identity for you as a self beyond being an athlete, so that separation of self and athlete status is really key. So we do look to facilitate people who, and the UK sport funding system enables some personal project stuff around that really nicely. So to have things that you can identify yourself with that are outside of your sporting realm, to build confidence and social networks. So
yes, a really great
whilst
point.
it is difficult to do, I think we do try and facilitate it where possible, and to the point where if it's not comfortable for people to do, we try and work through that over time, because we've kind of sense it's a really important platform for life beyond sport.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Craig, that you guys sort of do that, because we sort of watch the athletes and obviously sort of enjoy seeing them do well and sort of win medals, but at the end of the day there's a person behind that who obviously beyond the career is sort of, I suppose any sport you sort of go for so long, then you have a life, and even outside, so I think having that sort of balance is sort of key. But do you guys sort of consciously do that as well, Craig, sort of work with them? Is that something within the program that you set to sort of have a more rounded identity outside the sport as well?
Yeah, completely. I mean, our philosophy within our group is kind of one of mutual growth. I don't pretend to be any particularly skilled in my work. I'm just looking to learn and grow, and grow with people. Like, I'm really excited by the opportunities to do things with others. So we'll go on these journeys together. We have great support from performance lifestyle and psychology and mentors and other athletes who've done these things. Because Jimmy, if winning a medal at the Olympic Games is kind of like the Instagram version of sport, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But if you pull behind the social media and you look at the daily grind, there's not always rosy days like that.
Absolutely, and there's only so many people that can win out of I think we sort of see, and like I suppose in any sport, there's so many people. It's certainly not easy to reach the top or stay there. That's for sure.
No, completely, and it's having been fortunate enough to go to the games this time. Like, something that many people have said, I can't attribute the quote to anyone in particular, but say if you're not enough without the medal, you won't be enough with it. And I think, having been fortunate enough to support people to win medals at world level, it's very much the case. You need to have an identity as a person and some foundations and anchors and networks as a person that are beyond stepping on a wooden step once in a blue moon and having something put around your neck. I think you have to have different avenues of where you get confidence from and your connectivity and your social circles. So that's the same for coaches.
Yeah,
as
absolutely,
well as
yeah. I think I'll steal that quote from him with some of the footballers I mentor. You put it in a better way than I can. I've been sort of trying to get that message across to them that there's only so many people can make it as a footballer, and obviously it's when you get if you get there, it's a short-lived career. So getting them to do the education and sort of look at things outside the area, absolutely, that's a great takeaway for anyone listening in any sport really, or anything for that matter, Craig. That's a really powerful point, that's for sure. A lot of us do, a lot of people do. I've certainly been there myself, tie into what we do professionally, identity, and I think that's a really, really key point really, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that if you're happy and stable, and by stable I mean able to reason and reflect and work through and connect with others and ask for help around adversity. I don't just mean that you're oblivious to struggle or anxiety. I think if you're able to work and grow through that as a person, then you're able to at least enjoy the ups and downs of sports arenas.
Absolutely, and for sure. And I think it sort of gives you that probably a better chance to do and fulfill your potential. Just sort of putting less pressure on oneself. Just go out there and do your best and see where the road takes you. That's all anyone can do, really.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a good ticket to taking the handbrake off in performance, I think, for sure.
Absolutely. And in terms of, say, I'm not sure if it's within your remit, but if anyone sort of listening is thinking, I'd like to know more about getting involved in canoe slalom, is there anything they can do, any sort of way you could sort of point them, Craig, any sort of listeners thinking, I'd like to get involved?
Yeah, sure, Jimmy. So, we'd love to have them, and hopefully on the back of some inspiring performances in the Olympic Games.
Absolutely,
we've got World Championships in London in 2023 as a qualifier for Paris. So British Canoeing have got a great website and a great membership package these days. They've really worked on it a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. So your first port of call would be the British Canoeing website, which has got all the connectivity for local clubs, where you can access rivers, how you can get into equipment, things like that. So that's your first port of call. And if you just want to kind of get an insight into what we do, then just whack Canoe Slalom in YouTube, and if you get a thread on it as much as I do, you'll be there for a while watching some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly I've watched in the past just to get ideas, really, in terms of always looking to sort of cross transfer ideas in sport. That's for sure. There's always something to learn
I think it's important. I'll just come in there, Jimmy, because that's an important thing to acknowledge. Like when you talked about the advancement of sport and technology, like I partly facilitated by UK Sport and British Canoeing. Like I've been in different coaching initiatives, courses, schemes with lots of people from different disciplines. So I connect with snow sports. I connect with AFL coaches in Australia, for example. Anything from anthropologists to sociologists to psychologists. Always looking to thread and learn, and definitely outside of your own world is a great way to do that. I've had the richest learning I've had in my career that has changed my course, both personally and in my practice of coaching, has come from interactions with people from other disciplines such as rugby, for example, which is probably as far away from canoe slalom as you can get as a sport, I would think. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think that's a great point you've made there in terms of sort of having that open mind, I guess, and sort of learning. There's always something to learn. I think in terms of certainly, canoeing, one thing's for sure, irrespective of what level one participates. I can imagine it'll, for me, it looks like a really good sport mentally and physically in terms of just going out there and, gives you something to sort of focus on, really. Sort of physical and mental challenge.
Absolutely. I think for anyone who hasn't done it, there's quite a surreal, special feeling to floating on water. It feels like you're not supposed to be there, So I've been involved for 30 odd years. I recently bought a subboard to enjoy with my children, and even that's given me a fresh take on the experience of being on water. So it doesn't matter what craft you're in. I think if you're able to swim and you're happy in water, then please go and give it a blast.
Absolutely. And in terms of your vision, Craig, I mean, obviously you've achieved a lot, and sort of, I'm sure you've got your own sort of goals, but just as a general idea, where do you sort of see yourself going forward? Sort of more of the same, and you've got obviously, you mentioned the World Championships coming up, but where do you sort of see yourself sort of going forward in sort of coaching?
Yeah, great time to ask that question. Be careful, my employers aren't listening.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm still invested in coaching canoe slalom for sure. I have been mindful, and I've actively pursued this, I guess, in the last sort of 4 to 6 years of my growing passion to challenge myself beyond the realms of my immediate sport. So I'm currently doing a mentoring qualification, for example. I'm really passionate about skill development, skill acquisition, and general coach development. I think I see myself connecting more with coaches than I do currently, and looking to grow together in those sort of domains, and maybe even challenge myself across into different worlds beyond sport in the mentoring and coach development areas.
Absolutely, no, for sure. That sounds really interesting. But we'll certainly keep an eye out to see how the Olympic canoe team do, and so the next major tournament, is it the World Championships? Did you say, Craig, in 2020?
Well, no, we have World Championships in about 10 days, Jimmy. Because it's Tokyo, so we wouldn't normally in an Olympic year, but due to the delays.
Of course, yeah.
We've got World Championships in Slovakia starting the week on Tuesday, and then that's the culmination of our season. So beyond that, we're then into the Paris cycle and beginning to plan a journey towards Paris. Yeah, so plenty going on, but
definitely, we'll definitely
we're just currently recalibrating our direction and motivation for one big push to the world.
Absolutely, we'll certainly definitely keep an eye out to see how you guys do, that's for sure. And thanks again, Craig, for joining us on the show. It's been really interesting. That the listeners have really sort of enjoyed that and sort of taken a lot away from that. And no doubt there might be listeners out there thinking they'll sort of at least have a look at the website and maybe get on board. If one person does, then great. But who knows? That's the sort of the aim of the show is to increase that awareness throughout the year of different sports and sort of encourage people to get out there and have a go. But thanks again, Craig. That was Craig Morris, Olympic Canoe Slalom Coach at British Canoeing. He's been very kind enough to join us on the Salford City Radio 94.4 FM Friday Sports Show. For your host, Jimmy Petruzzi.